aren't we all kind of searching for that one little moment that's left? That one little thing. And if we got one more hour, what would we do with it? So to me, that's kind of what it is. It's like we're always looking for uh, that moment in time where we can grasp on something really clearly and know what it really means. And we're all looking for a little bit of saving time, right? We're all looking for, if I just had another week, if I had another, hour to do this job, or if I had, one more day with my grandchild or whatever it is, right? We're all looking for that one extra thing. And so to me, the idea of grasping onto one more hour of time is really about, one more experience, one more journey, one more
Yes.
thing in your life.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I'll introduce my guest in just a minute, but I want to remind you that if you go to spiritualforum.org, you can sign up for my newsletter. It comes out once a week, and you'll have the latest episode. You'll also have some spiritual affirmation, my reflections on the last podcast, some segments from prior podcasts, all sorts of good stuff. So I keep making it fuller and fuller for you to support you in your spiritual life. This podcast is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening. And so if you want a dose of that every week, sign up for my newsletter at thespiritualforum.org. Also, don't forget my retreat in October. You can learn about that on the website as well. It is called A World That Works for All, and it is a whole planet spirituality retreat, and it is at Unity Village, October 17th through 20th. I'm not going to say any more about that other than if you want to live in a world that works for all, you might want to come. It's a very, very special experience for anybody who comes. And you can attend virtually as well. All right, let me tell you about my guest, David Berner. He's an acclaimed, award-winning author of fiction, creative nonfiction, memoirs, short stories, and poetry. A retired associate professor at Columbia College, Chicago, longtime Chicago broadcast journalist. He now teaches writing at Gotham Writers Workshop of New York City. He's written several novels and nonfiction books, but today we're going to be focusing on his recent book, which is titled Daylight Savings Time, and this is focused on the power of aging. I think this is a really, really important topic, even for those of you who are young and don't think you're aging and aren't even thinking about it. I think this is going to include all of us. So welcome, David.
Well, thank you for having me, Carol. I appreciate that. We'll try to stay in the moment and not grow older during this time with you. So
Right, right. I was reading yesterday, I think if we can travel at the speed of light, then time stops.
yeah,
So
right.
that's
Yeah,
all we have to try to figure out how
yeah,
to do.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting though, you say that, but the whole book is really about embracing as we go through that time, you know, because if you're always reflecting on something that was great 20 years ago, you're not really living in the moment. And I know that's a cliche these days to say, be present, be in the moment, but it really is true. I mean, it really is.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. We're in this space-time continuum, and so time is part of it. So
Yeah.
there's always reflection backwards and always um, imagining forward.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think spiritually, we know, or at least on the spiritual path, we know that everything expands in the present moment and to kind of dwell there. So
Right.
before we get into all that, though,
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit more about you? I had a very brief bio, and
Yeah.
your book is very, there's a lot of texture in it and a lot of heart in it,
Yeah.
and so I really got a sense of your writing. And you also live in Chicago, but can you tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about your spiritual journey?
Oh, well, that's a good question. The spiritual journey part. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, a working class town, working class family. I still hold to those values a lot. They mean a lot to me. And I was the first one in my family to go to college. So it gives you a sense of the kind of family I grew up in, and went away to college, which was even crazier. So I'm kind of the outlier in the family and ended up moving to Chicago, got into broadcasting when it's what I always wanted to do when I was a kid. Actually, I really wanted to play, my hair was long. I had hair. My hair was long. I wanted to play Led Zeppelin on the radio for the rest of my life. I ended up getting into the news, long story short, but it made sense because story was always a part of my life. I always loved to read. I watched the Jacques Cousteau documentaries. If people are old enough to remember those back in television, those were fascinating to me, and they were just stories. And I found out later in my life how much that meant to me. So I got into news. I moved to Chicago, worked in news, radio, and journalism for a long time, print journalism a little bit, did a small amount of television. Really didn't start writing in terms of books until I was in my 40s. I
Hmm.
had always written news and journalism, and that was a different animal. But I started to get into writing in my 40s, and I had taken a break from journalism and began teaching in a troubled school district. And I would come home and I would tell my boys, my 2 sons at that time, I'd say, "This is not your world, this world I'm teaching in. These are the kinds of things that happen." And I would tell them some of the funny, sometimes tragic things that would happen, that had happened or had happened to my students. And my older son said, "Dad, are you writing this down?" And for some strange reason, it never occurred to me to write it down. So I began to write it down. And it became my first book, Accidental Lessons, which is really about my journey to figuring out sort of who I am at the age of 46. But the idea is that I learned those lessons through these middle school and high school students. So that changed my whole trajectory as far as writing concerned. I started to write a little more often, a little more with purpose, and 12 books later, um I'm here. And I've written some fiction. I just had a novella accepted for publication that will be published in 2 years from now. Yeah, it takes that long to publish things these days.
Wow.
Sometimes that seems weird in a world of digital work, but the marketing and the setup and all the work that needs to get done beforehand, it does take that long. So I began my writing career. But you mentioned spirituality, which is an interesting thing because for me, I grew up in a very traditional Catholic family, Irish Catholic family. Everybody went to church. You didn't think twice about it. And there was an incident actually that I wrote about in one of my books when at that time, the Catholic Church was pretty strict about if you hadn't given money over a period of time, they would come looking for you, to put it lightly. And my grandmother had died, and the Catholic Church says, "Well, we can't have a mass for her in the church." And my dad said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, she hasn't given to the church in any way in the last 20 years." And my dad flipped out, and he flipped out to the priest while I was like, 6, 7 years old, standing there watching him, figuring, okay, I'm going to hell now because my dad is yelling at a priest, right? Um, and that switched my whole family. My whole family began to think very much about differently about their Catholicism. And that also shifted me. And then I went through the 1960s and all the reawakenings of that time. And so to consider my soul spiritually, I really think of myself as a continual searcher.
Uh-huh.
There are moments I think Buddhism works for me. There are moments I think, um, even atheism works for me. There are other times I think that, some other discipline is working for me. But I've learned that I'm really just taking bits from each one to make it work for me. And whether some people might think that's not the best way to go, but for me it is because I feel like that's what I'm doing. And I think my books have taken on that persona in a lot of ways. Persona may not be the right word because that implies that it's not true, but it is. And I always feel like I'm searching for something. Um, and I don't see that as a negative because I don't think any of us really know what other forces are out there. There are things that are bigger than us. I believe that. I don't know what it is though. Um, and it may just be nature for all I know, but I don't know. And that's the searching part for me. And I think my books, even my fiction, takes on a little of that. And I've learned that over time. It took me a long time to kind of settle into that, but that's where I am. And the book Daylight Saving Time, The Power of Growing Older, is also very much, I think you would agree, very much about a searching, like, well, what does this mean now? What does this mean? I mean, reflecting on your past is great, but keeping your eyes forward is is to me more important. You want to take I am what I am when I was, like I'm part of it growing up in a working class family that was very, Catholic at the time. But I'm a different person now. And that I carry that with me. That's always going to be there. And it's important to me, but I'm trying to look forward. I'm trying to find out what that thing is out there. God, I hope I can figure out what that is someday. It'd be really nice to wake up one day and go, "Oh, that's it."
Got
But I'm
it.
not sure that's gonna happen. But it's a fun journey. I'll give it that.
Yeah, I mean, life is a journey, and there are a few things I want to pick up from your story. One is just to start with, I think it's really interesting that you're the only one in your family that, went to college and
Yeah.
kind of moved away and did all of this stuff. And I think that's part of that searching. I think there's something about whatever it is that you believe, something about the spirit in you that wanted to move beyond where you came from. And there's some kind of spark in you that was so interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I don't know why I was different. I really don't. Other than knowing that my mother from the time I was 8 years old always said to me, "I don't care what it takes, you're going to college." So I
Okay.
had it in my head that, "Oh, well, that's just what I'm supposed to do," right? Obey my mother and go to college, right? I think if my mother would have never said that, might have fallen into the pattern of the rest of my family. Not that that's a bad thing, but that's what I would have done. And maybe I wouldn't have, been on the journey that I am now. And I linked that almost strangely to my mother's words at the time
And
because
that's
I
really
I just took it
interesting.
as like, "Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do now." Funny, I never heard it
Yeah.
from my father though. My father didn't never said that to me, but my mother
Yeah.
always did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of shows how we could plant seeds for people. In her case, it's probably more than seeds, but
Yeah.
just what one person saying something, person that's important to you, obviously your mother was, saying
Yeah.
something to you, plants that seed, and then that's where you're gonna go. I think it really shows how important our words can be and how we can influence others and encourage them. And, well, good for you. I think that's really interesting. That kinda set your life on a trajectory of where you are now as a writer and a searcher. I do like the term searcher. I think it's interesting that you started writing in your 40s and that did you say you wrote your first book when you're 46? Was that the one about the
Yeah, I was running
teaching?
around 46. I always kind of forget. I always have to try
Yeah.
to remember, but it was
That's a middle
46.
passage time. That's a middle passage time. That's a time where we are trying to figure out who we are because not all the tools of the past work when you're when from
Yeah,
mid
and
40s on.
that's exactly the point too, because I was at a time in my career in broadcasting where I was going, "Do I want to keep doing this? Is this right for me?" And I was really questioning that. So it certainly was a time that if there was a time for me to switch gears, I was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people in their 40s. It is midlife to really reflect, like you said, don't dwell on the past, but there's a shift that happens there. There's a shift that happens in who we are. And if we skip over that, then we find ourselves doing really weird things, starting our lives over you know, with people we have nothing in common with,
Yeah, who
ending
knows?
family
I mean, yeah.
relationships and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's a searching in a way too, even if you make those mistakes, if they are
sure.
mistakes. I mean, I've well made our share of mistakes, right? Bad choices or choices that we thought were great at the time. But, I think that process of growing and growing older to sort of when I use the term in the subtitle, the power of growing older, to me, it's really about the power of embracing what you got and what you can possibly still do. And that doesn't necessarily mean career. It could mean anything. It could mean, mending fences from long ago relationships. It could mean, uh, you know, committing yourself to something, in terms of social justice or even spirituality. I mean, that's all power to me. Um, so I think that's an important part of what that subtitle means in the book is that it's really not about, we wrestled with the title, the publisher and I wrestled with the title a little bit, The Power of Growing Older, because we didn't want it to sound like a self-help book because it really isn't. It's a personal journey. but he thought the word power, or my editor at the time thought the word power made a lot of sense. And I think he's right. Um, I still get people who think it's a self-help book when they look at the title, but, that's what happens. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
get that. It is your story, and it is a series of stories in your life and your thoughts and your reflections and all. And it is a journey. And I think that's why I think you're kind of naming yourself as a searcher is very appropriate. We're all searchers. And at some point you mentioned that your journey was part Catholicism and then atheism and this and that, and people may judge that as not being the right way, but no one needs to judge anyone's spiritual journey. We're all searching. Ultimately,
Yeah.
we're searching for who we are on this
Right.
whole journey, and that's really what
Right.
your book, I think, is about.
Yeah, and it's not only who we are, but I think what is the core of what drives us? What is it? Is it family? Is it career? Is it creativity? For me, I learned early on when I switched from wanting to play Led Zeppelin on the radio to doing news, that it was about stories. I just want to tell stories. Even when I play music, it's really storytelling, you know? And I learned that early on in terms of understanding it, but I didn't really embrace it until I started to write more seriously.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize, oh, this is a huge part of me that I maybe haven't nurtured, you know? So I'm glad I figured that out when I was 40 and not 70, so.
Well, even if you forget when you're 70, there's
Oh,
still
you can still
power
do
there,
it.
right?
Yeah, you can still I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just time's running out, there's no way around that one.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about time. Why did you name your book Daylight Savings Time or Daylight Saving Time?
Well, the story, when readers read it, they'll see that it takes place during the time that we switch our clocks, and that we do in America. I know that I have a lot of readers in the UK. Some places don't do that, but I think they understand the concept. Um, and I wanted to wrap it around that to say, aren't we all kind of searching for that one little moment that's left? That one little thing. And if we got one more hour, what would we do with it? So to me, that's kind of what it is. It's like we're always looking for uh, that moment in time where we can grasp on something really clearly and know what it really means. And we're all looking for a little bit of saving time, right? We're all looking for, if I just had another week, if I had another, hour to do this job, or if I had, one more day with my grandchild or whatever it is, right? We're all looking for that one extra thing. And so to me, the idea of grasping onto one more hour of time is really about, one more experience, one more journey, one more
Yeah.
thing in your life. And that's where it came from.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of that because actually I see a lot of people kind of just watching Netflix,
Mhm.
checking their phones,
Yeah.
like not really feeling the passion of that extra hour that we could possibly get. And so
Yeah.
do you think that that
Yeah.
kind of what happens more like as we age that the door becomes closer to us and so therefore time becomes something that's definitely more precious to us?
Oh, yeah, and I don't think we realize that until we start to grow older, and that could mean, I mean, we could realize it when we're in our 30s, but I think most people really start to realize it when they know that there's fewer years left than there are behind you,
Yeah.
and that's when it really starts to kick in. Um, I feel like I was 30 yesterday. It doesn't feel like a long time ago, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And and I was a different person. And elements of myself still remain, obviously, but we're a different person when we age, and I think we start to look at time differently. I tell people all the time that retirement, in the old traditional way of the 50s and 60s, is not a thing anymore. And
Mhm.
I don't mean it necessarily about a job or making money or having enough to live or anything like that. But retire from what? I mean, you're not retiring from living. So what is it that you're retiring from? Oh, you're retiring from maybe daily traditional work. I don't know if I'd call it retirement. I'd call it a shift, you know?
Hmm.
Um, like I don't feel retired, although, I'm considered a retired associate professor. Well, I'm retired because they're sending me a check for my pension. That's why I'm retired, but I'm not really retired. I'm not backing off. I'm probably doing more now than I was then.
Hmm.
Um, and I would encourage people not to think of retirement as a sort of stuck in the mud. I don't think I don't think that's a thing. And I think that slows down your possibilities and it takes from your, spiritual life, your creative life, your familial life, you know, sure, physically, mentally, things change as you get older and that's normal. But it doesn't mean that, you should just watch Netflix all day. you know, there's nothing wrong with Netflix. I'm just saying, why get stuck in the mud? I don't understand that. And the book, daylight saving time is really about that. I think people will get that when they read it. It's about embracing what you got and you know, living in the moment, but also thinking about what can I do with this? What can I make? How can I make this really special and not just special, but really special? And I think in a lot of ways, that's a lesson you can teach people who are younger than you, even your kids or whatever. I think they can see that in your process. Means something.
Yeah, I do think that we can kind of model what post working every day in the world looks like. Um, but that's not that traditional retirement. I know
Yeah.
for me, what became really clear for me was when both of my parents passed.
Mm,
And now suddenly it just became really clear, that I'm up next. It
mm,
wasn't like an age. It wasn't like for me, it wasn't like there's less years ahead of me than behind me. It was like, okay, it's pretty clear. We're-
yeah.
I'm up
Right.
next. I'm up next. And I
Right.
do think that it didn't give me an urgency, but more a vibrancy. What do I want how do I want to express myself in these years? And they're vital years. And there's no reason to sit around and just kind of like sit on the bench. Although people who sit on the bench, you have people in your book who are sitting on the bench that you kind of question and wonder
Yeah.
about their lives,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we really can't judge that. Maybe that's the right and perfect thing for them.
Yeah, and I don't mean to. Yeah, I hope nobody gets from the book that I'm judging those people because I
No, I
don't.
don't think so.
Yeah, okay, good. I don't mean to be judgmental, but
No.
I'm all. I think what I'm doing is challenging. I'm saying, hey, you might. It wouldn't be a good idea maybe to think about it differently, or to think about it a little differently, or change your outlook on that. Everybody's got their own way, and I'm not suggesting that my way or my way of thinking is the way to go. But I'm just offering that personal story that I think it could spark something for somebody. It could make them think differently. I had a book review from a reader just recently that really struck me. And they said that in the book, I wrote a letter to my sons that is supposed to be opened
Mm.
when I die. Now, my I'll give you a little tidbit here. My kids have never read any of my books. Uh, they just Hey, they're like, "Dad, we know who you are. We know what you do." Yes, whatever. So they're not gonna read the book and they're not gonna read the letters until I die, and maybe they won't then either. But the point is, I wrote the letters to my sons for a reason, and really, it was really about me to impart something, I guess. But back to the point of the reader, who wrote the review on one of the online sites, said it inspired me to write my own letter to my children and for
Mhm.
my grandchildren. Wow. I mean, if that's all I've done with this book, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one. I think we should all do that if we feel called. And I didn't feel like you were judging the guy on the bench at all. I felt like you were just kind of wondering about him. How did he get here? What was his life like? And I think
Right.
that's everywhere. We
Right.
we we can judge. Oh, that person did that, and that's why they're there. But it's like, who knows what their life path was? One of the things I really liked about what you wrote about was I think there was a time where you were looking at in your mind's eye anyway that the roads not traveled. Like I never
Mhm.
tried this and I never tried that and I never tried this and I never tried that. and
Right.
ultimately coming to the conclusion that that wasn't who you were, that you
Yeah.
were who you are. And so I bring this up because I do think that we do often reflect on what else I could have done, or what if I'd made that choice instead of that, I could be here or there. And our minds can have just a blast imagining all of that and taking us down all sorts of different streets, some probably positive and some probably horrible. But ultimately you came to the conclusion that, you are who you are and you took the path you took, and that's the one you were supposed to take.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you caught that in the book because, we can sit around a lot and say, oh, gee, when I was 20, I had the opportunity to do this, but I didn't. Why didn't I do that? Well, you didn't do it because you weren't ready at 20, or you weren't, committed enough, or you weren't sure enough, or maybe you had your own anxieties that you couldn't deal with at the moment. So why not do it when you're 50? You know what I mean? If you've gotten past that now and you want to try it, why not? There's nothing wrong with that, and I think that's the kind of the power I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I look back at some of the things and the things that I did when I was 20 and thought, man, why didn't I do that? Because that sounds way cooler than what I did. Like, I took the safe road a couple of times that I thought was, like I think now it's like, well, why did I do that? Well, I did that because I didn't have the confidence to do anything else, or I didn't have the worldly knowledge or the people around me or who were saying, yeah, go ahead and do that, because nobody did that in my family.
Yeah.
They grew up in Western Pennsylvania. They bought a house. They had a family. Their parents lived down the street. Their children grew up, bought a house, did the same thing. They lived down the street. They never left, and that's fine. But that wasn't me. But all that was enough around me that I didn't have enough confidence to break it. The only thing that broke it was my mother telling me, "You're going to college." Because otherwise, I probably would be there. I probably would have
Yeah.
lived a very similar life. I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very easy to stay in the patterns of what came before us, and it's almost like there's programming that we just have to kind of it's like swimming against a stream a little bit, like
Yeah.
to to do something different than what's been done for generations. It takes a lot of heart, I think, and well, I think it's wonderful that your mother was inspiring you in that way.
Did
And,
it in
and
a very subtle way. It was never like, "You're going to college," It was very much just like, as a matter of fact, like,
yeah,
"Yeah, that's what you're doing, just so you
yeah.
know."
Just so you know.
Yeah.
Uh, check's been written.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, before we started recording, I mentioned to you that you opened your book by saying, "When I was a young man, it never occurred to me that anyone would grow old." And I think that that is really the sentiment of most people who are younger. And so, what do we want to tell younger people about the power of aging because they're not aware that really they are aging? Or maybe
Yeah.
they are and they're just putting it somewhere. What is the message for them?
Well, I think we all, when we're young, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. When we're young, and that can mean when we're 12 or 18 or 25, but we think we're, you know, immortal, and we don't really think about death in any way unless it happens around us. A friend dies in college, or, your mother dies young, or your father dies young, or whatever. And then it may, come into your world a bit. But generally, I think most people don't when they're younger. They think about, well, I've got this long life ahead, and I've got time, and I've got all these precious things that are going to happen to me in the next decades. So to answer your question, I would say you're not immortal, and that take a risk, especially when you're young. If you're going to take a risk, if you're going to, you know, hitchhike across the country, do it now when you have the energy and you don't have anything that you're responsible for,
Yeah.
a child, those kinds of things. But, that also doesn't mean that if you have a child that you can't still take risks. It doesn't matter. It's just your opportunities are smaller, but you still can do that. Um, so that's what I would say. If your heart is singing at something, then go there and sing with it, because when you're 60, it might be a lot harder to do for whatever
Yeah.
reason, you know? So, I told my kids this when they were younger, take risks, do things that there's a great phrase, and I'm not sure this story is exactly true, but I like it. So we're going to go with it. Robert Kennedy, not the current Robert Kennedy Jr., but the senator, the assassinated presidential candidate back in 1968, used to keep a little note in his wallet, and it said, "Do the things you're afraid to do."
Mm.
And I always thought that that was a wonderful phrase because that is about take that risk. Go ahead. So what if you fail? You're going to learn from it. Figure it out. It'll be okay. Do the things you're afraid to do. Do those things that seem maybe out of the ordinary or, for me, leaving Western Pennsylvania, nobody left Western Pennsylvania in my era. So, I didn't think it was that risky at the time in my head. But now when I look back at it, it's like, wow, I really broke the mold, good or bad. I did. And I would encourage people to do that. I would encourage young people to do that. Try something different. Go live in another country, you know, explore, stretch your brain, stretch your heart. I think you can do that when you're 50, but it's easier when you're 20.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
remember I what I was gonna say is that it does get kinda harder when you have responsibilities and kids and all that kinda stuff, and so I
Mm.
remember that when I had children, I used to have this fantasy in my mind. I would have been in probably my 40s, maybe late 30s. I used to have this fantasy in my mind that I would, like, get in a car and not even pack anything, but just kinda get in a car, grab a purse, and then just go west on I-10.
And just keep driving.
And just keep driving. And, like, my mind would take me to, like, a diner, and I'd get a meal, and then I'd have to, like, wash dishes to pay for it, and then just keep driving. And it was a really lovely fantasy that I never acted on, thank God, because I loved my family. But there was something in me that really wanted to explore and to expand out and to move beyond the parameters that I'd created for myself.
Mhm.
I'm mentioning this because then it just kind of occurred to me that I did have a big shift. I went from one career and I went into ministry and now I'm doing this. And so I think that the metaphor of getting in the car and going west,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
able to act out, but I didn't leave my family and get in the car and go west. But I
Yeah.
did make some major changes in my life and took a lot of risks to do
Yeah.
things that I had never done before.
That's
So that,
I think that's a very common thought of getting in your car and just going. I don't think that that's an unusual thing for a lot of people, especially on that really hard day when your kids are young. Um,
get in that car.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's unusual, but that's a really good point about a metaphor about that, you know, yeah, I kind of did that in a different way, you know,
Yeah,
which is great. Think of it
yeah,
that way. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I wish more people
life
would think like that.
life is very I mean, it's we don't know if we have a whole bunch more lifetimes. We don't know anything. Like you said in the beginning, we don't know. I also believe that there is a presence beyond what I know, but we don't know, no
Mhm.
matter how religious we are, no matter how educated we are, we really don't know what this world that we're living in is, what happens later, if anything happens. And so we do have the present moment. I mean, that is the one thing that we do have. We do have this lifetime.
Right.
And so, how are we going to live it? Not spend it, but live it. And so anyway, I think that's what a lot of what you're conveying in your book is all about. And
Yeah, it's
also a lot
about
of
yeah, it's about, embracing the time you have.
yeah.
And that
No
could
matter
mean
what.
a million things to a million different people. Yeah.
Yeah, and not all of us grow old. So here's another thing to think about, not all of us grow old. Some of us get taken out young, and we
Yeah.
don't know, we
Yeah.
don't know. So you
Yeah.
also can't really necessarily count on, well, when I'm in my 50s and 60s and 70s, I'm gonna start doing this in my life. We do not know if we have another day. So if this
Yeah.
day is it, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, I hear people, I've heard people say things like, yeah, when I retire, I'm going to start to paint, or when I retire, I'm going to do more gardening. Why
Yeah.
aren't you doing that now? I
Yeah.
don't understand. Take an hour. I teach writers. I teach writers, and many of them are older people, and I mean, over 40, and many of them say, "Well, I don't, I don't have a lot of time, or I can't make time." And I really challenge them on that. I really say, "Yeah, you do. You just get up an hour earlier, go to bed an hour later. You don't have to write every day. You just have to write continually, often, and do it now, because it's not gonna you may not have tomorrow. And if anybody can make time for whatever they want to do if they really want to do it.
Yes.
And I get a little tired of hearing people saying, "Well, I don't have the time." Yeah, you do. You just have your priorities a little off for what you want to accomplish. That's all it is. We have the time, but we have to embrace that time. You have to say, "Okay, I'm going to get up 15 minutes earlier." I had a friend many years ago wrote a screenplay, and all she did was 20 minutes on the train into the city. That's the only time she wrote. In the morning on the train, I got 20 minutes sitting on the train. What else am I going to do? I could read the paper. I could look at my phone. I could talk to a fellow commuter. No, I'm going to write 20 minutes every day on the train. She didn't wait. She was 40 years old. This is the time I have. This is what I'm going to do with this time. And, so you have to, I hate to use the phrase, put your priorities straight, because priorities can mean a lot of different things. But if you really want to do something, time is there. You just have to make that adjustment.
Yeah, I think there's a certain honesty about that where people make I was gonna use the word excuses, like, "I don't have enough
Mhm.
time," is like an excuse, and what you're really saying is, I think, that's not as I say that's important to me, but I'm not acting like that's important to me. So
Yeah,
let's just be
yeah,
honest. Let's just be
yeah.
honest, you know? You say you wanna write a book, but if you really wanted to write a book, you'd be organizing your life around it.
Yes, absolutely. I had another friend, speaking of people who are writers, they would get up an hour and they would go into their little place where they wrote, office or wherever they went, and they would lock the door. And they put a note on the other side of the door that said, "Only if there's a fire, do not bother me. I don't care what's going on. I I got this hour." And, it became a process. He'd have little kids knocking on the door, "Mommy, daddy, please open the door." Nope. Look at the sign. It's like, nope. And after a while, the family got it. They were like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
mom's writing." Yeah. Okay. They'll get it. They'll understand. You have to
Yeah.
make that priority. You have to really do. And that's just not about writing. That could be anything you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. There's another aspect of aging which can get into focusing on limitations and focusing on, "Oh, I can't move as fast," or, "Oh, this hurts," or I'm just my mind isn't as good, or I don't have as good a memory." There's a lot of ways that as you age, you can dwell in those spaces of how your body's not
Mhm.
working as well as it did. And so
Right.
what do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm a firm believer, and I'm not always, a practitioner at this as best I can be. But I do think that, physically, there's no question that you have to keep moving, take a walk. You don't have to become a marathon runner, but you do have to keep moving. And it also puts endorphins in your head. It helps you start, processing things and being creative and whatever else that means to you. But I really believe you have to move, and that could be anything. Take a walk the dog, get up with friends in the neighborhood and take a walk. You can go as far as going to the gym if that's what you like. Play basketball, play golf, do whatever you do, but keep moving. You know, Uh, I liken it to somebody who has a car, a classic car, and they keep it in their garage, but they never take it out. Well, if
Huh.
they do that and they never run the car is going to seize up. It
I had a
just
car like
is.
that once.
Yeah, it's just gonna sit there and seize up, and when you do try to start it, it's gonna blow up, or it's not gonna start at all, and it's gonna need hundreds of dollars of repairs, thousands of dollars. So, but if you take it out every weekend and drive it around the block a few times and take it out on the highway for a little bit, it's going to be in better shape. And, I'm not sure that answers your question, but I truly do believe that that is a thing. Now, I have to beat myself up and say, okay, you need to move today. You need to get going. And I have people in my life that hold me accountable to that because I need it. But it is it is true though. I mean, there is no way around it. There's no magic pill. I don't care about all the memes you've seen on Instagram that tell you, do this thing, drink this weird coffee concoction, and you are going to be a perfect person again. That is garbage. We all know it's garbage, but we're looking for it because we think we want the simple way out. The reality is you still got to get up and take the walk. I'm sorry, but
Yeah,
that's what you
yeah.
got to do.
And I think,
Yeah.
I think that there's also just, as long as you're able to keep moving, we can focus on what works instead of what
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah, and I do understand that some people have, ailments or physical things that
Yeah,
they may not be able to do this as well as they could.
yeah,
But the point is to stay active in some way, physically and mentally.
yeah.
I think it's really important.
Yeah, my husband and I this morning, we were talking about my father lived till he was 96, and
Wow.
he had a sharp, sharp mind. And my husband says I think it's because he did crosswords every single day.
Mm,
He did the I think it was, the Wall Street Journal crossword puzzle every day of his life.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if that's all of it, but that was mental exercise,
Yeah,
and
I my
yeah.
my father-in-law is 92. Physically, he's a little troubled, but his mind is still pretty sharp, and he does puzzles. Same sort of thing,
Yeah.
just keeps things active mentally. Um, yeah, I do the mini crossword in the New York Times every morning, and I do Wordle too. I'm hoping that gives me another year or 2.
That mental acuity.
Yeah,
So there's a couple other things I wanna to cover. In
yeah,
your book, you distinguish loneliness and aloneness,
yeah,
and I thought that was lovely because I think we focus on when we're alone, we think we're lonely, but there's a distinction. Can you share a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I don't think it's a new concept for me. I think it's been said in different ways before, but I love being alone. I do. I love my alone time, as people say, the time when it's about me. And I think I get that a lot from my writing. When I lock myself in my office and I'm writing, that's kind of my alone time. I really like that. It's a sort of decompression in a way. But but loneliness is to me is about the lack of being acknowledged. That to me is what loneliness is. It's like I'm not being seen.
Mm,
And whether that's, by your partner, by your family, by your work, by your friends, your dog, whatever. If you're not being acknowledged somehow, that's where loneliness comes from. And that's why being engaged with the human world, our cultural and societal world is so important in some fashion. It doesn't mean you have to be, a party goer. Doesn't mean you have to go to the club every weekend. That's not what I'm talking about. It's about being acknowledged.
mhm,
And, that's why they always say like just a good pat on the back from your boss is sometimes all people need. It's just
mhm.
being acknowledged, you know? And that to me is where a lot of the loneliness comes from.
Yeah, I think it's universal that we all want to be seen in some way, and it has nothing to
Yeah.
do with extroversion or introversion. We all want to be seen, and I love that you say just a pat on the back goes a long way. And I think in your book you said, "With aloneness, I am in the presence of myself."
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you really aren't alone. You're with yourself.
Yeah. And you better like yourself, at
Well, so
least
that's
most of
that's
yourself.
that's the task for all the young people who are listening today.
Yeah.
Work on liking yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make
That's a
yourself
really good point.
likable. Yeah,
Yeah.
make yourself likable so that when you are alone, you're in the presence of yourself and you love it.
Yeah. I know. I've said this phrase before, be the person you want your friend to be.
Mhm, mhm.
Be the person you want your friend to be. If you want your friend to check in on you and see how you're doing and to be there if you need to talk or to, whatever that may be, however you see friendship. then be that person to somebody else. And I think that will help you just start to like yourself a little bit more. Sure, there are all aspects of all of our lives that we don't, we're like, man, I'd like to change that a little bit, or I'm going to work on that. We're all flawed. That's the way it goes. But, finding, reminding yourself that you can always be better. You can be a little more kind, a little more loving, a little more present. Um, we can all do that, you know. Um, and
Well,
I
yeah.
think I would tell young people that too, if I could.
Yeah. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, okay, be the person that, like the friend that you would want to have. So be kinder to other people. But you can also turn that inward, be kinder to yourself,
Yeah.
pat yourself on the back, you know, pump yourself up.
Yeah,
Because,
that's a really good point. Because I've found myself, at times either in creatively or in work or even in partnership relationships where I beat myself up about something. It's okay to do that because I think we all learn something. But where the problem comes in is when we dwell on it or
yeah,
we make that be who we are, you know. I cheated on my wife. Well, okay, that's a terrible thing and probably shouldn't have done that, but you're not going to be able to fix that now. So what are you going to do now to make that? Yes, that's a part of my past, but what do I do now to make that thing become not me?
yeah,
Why
yeah.
not my albatross, Yeah.
Yeah, so I think now you're kinda getting into, like, regrets, because I think
Yeah.
another thing that happens when you age is, because I think we can keep really, really busy when we're kind of the squirrel on the wheel, and we're in our careers and making money and having families and all that kinda stuff that we can get really busy and not do a lot of self-reflection, and then when we get to this place where self-reflection is just right there in front of you because perhaps you do have more time or you've gotten off the hamster wheel or whatever. Okay, now you're faced with, "Oh gosh, I have all these regrets. I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that." And I think some people, as they age, really get into that space where
Yeah.
they're dwelling in all the things that they could have done differently. And, that to me seems like the not the best use of our time, of our limited time.
No, and I would say if that's where you are, I mean, I'm not a therapist. I don't play one on television. I am not a philosopher, but in my take, if you feel like you have a lot of regrets, maybe just take one thing that you've regretted and twist it, do something with it, take it to the next step, repair it, fix it, change it, look at it differently. You don't have to do them all, you know.
Yeah.
I tend to say this a lot, but I don't know whether I totally believe it. But I tend to say a lot that I have no regrets. I tend to say that everything that I've done that I've either done wrong or failed or whatever it may have made me who I am now. Well, that's all well and good if you like who you are now.
Mhm,
If you
mhm.
don't like who you are now, if you don't have that now, if you haven't gotten past that, then then it becomes really hard. So maybe just take one thing that you can work on about yourself. And it could be a miraculous change in the way you look and feel about yourself, if you can manage that one thing.
Mhm, mm.
Sometimes it's really hard for people. I get that. I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
Um,
often we are doing the best we can, with our limited everything. It depends on what that one thing was, but sometimes
right.
coming to the conclusion that, given everything that I was at that time, everything was happening, I did the best I could, and maybe that was there for me to learn, to
Yeah.
to become a better person or to get on a new trajectory or something like that. Look for what it did for you.
Yeah. It's a phrase we hear a lot. My mother used to say it too. It's like, was it, she exactly said, everything happens for a reason. I don't
Mhm,
know if I
mhm.
totally believe that, but I like to think that it does. I like to think that, oh, that happened and it wasn't pleasant, but it got me here, or that thing was
Yeah.
hard and really difficult to get through, but it got me here. Or it's made me into this, or I'm better at this now because that bad thing happened. I think that's okay. It's funny how things haunt you though, like these little things even. Many years ago when I was in broadcasting and early broadcasting, just getting into the business, I was in Pittsburgh and I was asked to speak at this. I don't know, it was some, luncheon for a bunch of executives. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the idea was that I was going to read the headlines of the day before the real speaker got up there because I was the news guy in town, right? So I got up and I pronounced the name of a very, very well-known baseball player wrong. And I can feel the crowd getting hushed and then several people in the crowd yelling back to me the right pronunciation. Well, that still little tiny thing haunts me.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
But
Completely
I
get
think
that.
that's what
Yeah.
I'm
I
talking
completely get
about.
that.
It's like that thing made
Yeah.
me make sure that made me make sure that next time I was never gonna have that happen again. I'm
Yeah.
gonna get this right if it kills me, right? Because I don't wanna
Yeah.
feel that feeling again. Yeah, and I think that, I think all of us could find something like that. That seems like a minor thing, but I can still viscerally feel what I felt like when that happened. So
Yeah,
it
and I
was.
think I think the interesting thing about it, I think that is part of aging. Those things sometimes come up, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah,
then they become kind of magnified. And I don't
right,
know if it's because you have more time to dwell on it or more things are coming up because that kind of the veil between your subconscious and conscious mind is getting a little bit thinner and more stuff's coming up. I think that's
right.
just really part of it. But I do think I do think that's part of the growing older process, and I also think there's gifts in that, if nothing else, just to love yourself, and forgive
Yeah.
yourself in those moments
Yeah.
where we didn't perform to the level we felt we could have,
And
and
also, I
that's
think
like being
when you're younger, you that feels like the end of the world, you know?
yeah, yeah,
If I
yeah,
if I
yeah,
if I'd have had that happen to me today or yesterday, I'd be like, "Yep, you're right. Right, that's the right pronunciation. If you wanna come up and do the news, come on up. Maybe you'll do it a little better." I would joke about it. I would take
yeah,
it
yeah,
so
yeah,
differently now, right? But back then, it
right.
was like, "Oh my god, what did I just do?" You know? It's horrible.
That's a good point. That's another powerful thing about growing older
Yeah.
is
Start
things
to
that
realize
matter
that a lot of
so
things don't matter.
didn't ma
They don't
yeah.
matter.
Yeah, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I want to give you the last word, but not quite yet. I want to talk a little bit about the cultural and societal stereotypes about growing older. And, there are some cultures that really embrace the growing older, embrace the wisdom of the elders. And the elders they speak and people
Right.
listen, and they're the ones who may be even driving the societal changes. And in our society, we have much more of a discarding of
Mhm.
the elderly.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just want to talk through that with you about how you feel about how can we transcend those culture and societal stereotypes about growing older.
Yeah, that's very true about other cultures. I was watching a documentary, a few months ago, about this town in Italy, that is supposed to have the oldest people, and living the better lives even as older people. And, why was that? And they didn't have an answer, but they did kind of give you a sense of it. And some of it was that they weren't put into nursing homes. Not saying that that has to happen sometimes. I understand that. They weren't put into nursing homes. They weren't discarded. They were accepted. They were still part of the family. They moved around. They physically moved a lot and they ate, to lack of a better description, a Mediterranean kind of diet, right? So we don't do that here. We don't do any of those, you know? I think more people, older people are moving around physically than they had maybe back in the 60s. But, we still have nursing homes. We still have discarding of that. We still, oh, that old person, please, old guy down the street, we need to just not pay attention to him. Yeah, I think we have that in our society. However, we are also becoming in America an older society by the day. We have much more people, either people aren't having, 10 kids like they did back in the 50s or 60s. People aren't having kids at all when they're getting married. So we are becoming older society. And as we become an older society, who's going to start making those decisions about older Americans? Older people.
Mm.
right? Because we're the majority now. It's like, well, hey, minority, it's time to listen up. You know, it's like, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to do this. So we have power. Older people, generally in the broad sense of that term, have more power today than they ever have in America. Far more. But we got to use it. We have to use it. One of the reasons why the US government doesn't cut Medicare is because they're going to lose a lot of votes because there's a lot of old people, right? We got power. We got power for a lot of reasons. So I would hope that sort of living longer and more older people in the American society will make sort of cultural change over time. I don't think it's something that's going to happen in a snap of fingers or tomorrow, but I think maybe the generation after me will see it differently. Maybe
Yeah.
my sons
Yeah.
will see it differently when they're older. Um, that's that's what I think will happen. It's not gonna be some policy by the government. It's not gonna be some big wave of change. It's gonna be an attrition kind of thing. It's gonna slowly take a different hold. Are we gonna end up being like that town in Italy? No, probably not. But we'll be better if we have more people on that side of the ledger. I think
Hmm.
so.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that there'll be some innovative things. My son-in-law had an idea, but maybe it wasn't his idea, he was telling me about it, about having elderly centers and, like, daycares together, like, they're like, why
Mm.
do we put the old people here and the young people here? And why
That's a great
where
idea.
isn't that a great idea? Or,
Yeah,
they're caregivers in different ways, but keep these generations together and allow the elderly people to, express their wisdom, to
it's a great idea.
open
Yeah.
ears and open hearts, and
Yeah, I mean, I felt this way when I was teaching college. That was one of the things I loved about it, is that I felt like I was part of their world. I was, I really wasn't, but I felt like I was learning something or understanding more or feeling a little more alive because I was in that I was understanding their culture. I was understanding their place in society a little bit more because I was in the middle of it. I couldn't pass it up. It was right there with me all the time. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, if we all hang around with old people, that's probably not the best thing. Not to say
yeah,
old people aren't
yeah.
great. I'm just saying, yeah, the whole idea, that's a great
Mix it
idea
up,
with older people.
mix
Yeah,
it
mix
up.
it up. Older people and take care. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so David, what else would you like to share with everybody as we close? Because I know we talked a lot about growing old, and I know your book is not a self-help book. It is really a book about your own reflections in your own life, and there's a lot of coffee in your book, right?
Oh, there's a lot of coffee, and there's coffee right here too. So, I can't live without it. Maybe my biggest vice.
Your things you enjoy.
Yeah. I would say, the book Daylight Saving Time, I hope people will see it for what it is. And that is a book about what I've experienced and maybe what others can take from it. Um, I don't mean to come across in any way that I'm the philosopher or I've got the right ideas or I've got the best idea. I just tell my story and I try to see if some of those things can be imparted in a way that people see as, powerful, that they can use it. Yeah, that they can learn from it or adapt their lives in a way that would be better for them. Um, and that's really what I want from the book. I never set out to write a self-help book. I don't feel I'm qualified to do anything like that, or a book of how-tos or anything of that. It's not my qualification. But I do write essays. I do write personal essays. I have written a number of memoirs. I think I know how to observe a life through my own journalism background, and I know how to observe my own life. And we are very much alike, all of us, more than we ever realize. And, what I've experienced, I'm sure that your readers have experienced it also in some way that's similar. And if we can find those similarities and take from a little something from each other, we can make our own lives better, we can make other people's lives better, I think.
I completely agree. We are so much more similar than different.
Right.
And we have so much commonality, and that's why I love stories like this because it's right. It's the heart of a man expressing himself and what you're experiencing life, and we can touch each other at that place because it's not
Mhm.
so dissimilar. I mean, people can be in different circumstances, but we have the same kinds of responses and the same kinds of feelings and the same kind of needs. We are s- we are so much alike. And in
Yeah.
this world of a lot of division, I think it's really important that we remember how we can be connected at this heart level. And
Right.
we're kind of all making our way through this experience of life and time and everything. And we
Yeah.
can, like you say, learn from each other and grow with each other.
Yeah. Be open. Be willing to hear other people's stories, other people's experiences. They aren't all like ours, but yet there's a thread that kind of ties us all together.
Yeah. Yep. I think so. All right. Well, thank you, David, for joining me today and sharing your journey and your life story. And we're talking about the power of growing older. And I know that this message is really, it's a message that can touch everybody, no matter what
I
age
think it
they
can.
are at.
Yeah.
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 This is not a story that's only for old people. I think anybody, any age can gain something from it. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Me too. Okay. Thank you, David. And thank you, listeners. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.